When despair strikes, there is only one choice that defines who you will be. There comes a moment when life stops negotiating and starts revealing. Not slowly, not politely, but in a single strike that cuts through every illusion you built about yourself. It is the moment when despair arrives without warning and exposes the truth you've been avoiding. The truth that strength was never proven in comfort, that confidence was never tested in applause, that your identity was never measured while everything was going right, but only when everything begins to fall apart at the same time. You feel the weight of what you can't control, the silence of people who used to care, the collapse of plans you were certain would work, and suddenly the world feels smaller, heavier, and uninterested in your pain. That is the threshold where most people break. Not because the world became cruel, but because they never learned who they really were without stability holding them together. Despair is not just sadness. It is the collapse of the version of you that was built on comfort, validation, goals, and borrowed strength. It dismantles every identity that depended on the approval of others, the certainty of the future, or the illusion that pain could always be avoided. Despair is the moment the game changes, because it forces you to face yourself without filters. You are no longer the person you said you were. You are the person who stands here now, with no excuses, no guarantees, and no promise that things will get better. And whether you rise or fall has nothing to do with inspiration. It has everything to do with choice. When despair strikes, you don't choose what happens. You only choose who you will become because of it. That is the decision the world never sees, but always reveals. People will see your results later. They will see your strength, your calm, your discipline, your clarity. What they won't see is this moment right now, where you are staring at a future that broke its agreement with you, trying to decide whether you're going to shrink into survival or rise into a version of yourself no one has met yet. That is the battlefield, not outside, inside. The Stoics understood something most people never will. Despair is not the enemy. It is the purification. It is the fire that burns every false layer of identity until only the essential remains. Marcus Aurelius didn't write Meditations from a Throne. He wrote them in the middle of war, betrayal, sickness, and loss, speaking not to the world, but to himself, reminding his own mind. A man is not defined by what he feels, but by what he chooses to do when feeling no longer helps. Your suffering doesn't make you weaker. Your refusal to assign meaning to it does. Pain is not what crushes you. The absence of purpose is. So the real question is not why despair arrived. It always arrives. The question is whether you will allow this moment to reduce you or refine you. Whether you will let it decide your limits or force you to discover new ones. Whether you will drown inside a version of yourself that was never meant to survive the fire, or use the fire to forge the version that finally can. This is the threshold, the moment the old self dies and the new one is chosen. Not when things get better, not when the pain ends, but right now in the middle of the storm, where every voice inside you says you have nothing left. That is where identity is born. That is where destiny is written. That is where the decision is made that will echo across every future version of you. Despair is not the moment you fall. It is the moment you finally realize you were standing on something that was never solid. It is the collapse of the illusion that life owed you stability, answers, timing, fairness, or protection. People assume despair comes from failure, loss, rejection, or uncertainty. But the truth is deeper. Despair appears when the mind can no longer pretend it is in control. When the story you were telling yourself about who you are, where you're going, and what should happen next can no longer survive contact with reality. And in that instant, every mask falls at once. That is why despair hurts. Not because life changed, but because the identity you built could not survive the change. Your confidence was based on momentum. Your peace was based on predictability. Your strength was based on the absence of pressure. And now that everything you depended on is gone, you are forced to face the version of yourself that existed beneath all the roles, titles, plans, and expectations. You discover that most of what you thought was you was only a reaction to comfort. And comfort is not identity. Comfort is a loan that life eventually collects. The most dangerous part of despair is not the pain, it is the confusion. The sudden inability to explain your own emotions, make sense of your own thoughts, or find a clear direction. You feel lost inside a mental fog where every answer sounds useless and every attempt to move forward feels heavy. This is why people start questioning their entire life at once. They don't just doubt the future, they doubt their worth, their purpose, their capacity, even their mind. Despair makes you feel like everything that once mattered has lost meaning. Not because it truly has, but because the path to it has disappeared. The bridge between where you are and where you hope to be has burned, and all that remains is a silent staring into uncertainty. This is the moment most people break internally, not because they lack strength, but because they expect strength to feel like confidence. They assume that strong people never feel lost, never feel fear, never feel exhausted, never feel hopeless. But strength is not the absence of those feelings. Strength is the decision to keep acting when those feelings are present. Despair does not expose weakness. It exposes dependency. It exposes how much of your identity was tied to external conditions, routines, relationships, security, applause, progress. As long as life cooperated, you felt solid. The moment it didn't, everything shook, not because life betrayed you, but because the foundation you built was borrowed, not forged. The Stoics understood despair not as a failure, but as a mirror, a violent, undeniable reflection of what you truly control and what you never did. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes unstoppable when it no longer resists reality. But most people fight despair as if it were a sign that life is breaking them, when in truth it is life revealing the parts of them that were never real to begin with. If despair is the collapse of illusions, then clarity is what appears after the illusions are gone. But you only reach clarity if you refuse to numb the pain and instead decide to investigate it. That is the difference between people who drown in despair and people who evolve through it. One escapes, the other studies. One hides from the pain, the other asks what the pain is trying to teach. One waits to feel okay before acting, the other learns to act while not feeling okay. The first becomes smaller. The second becomes unrecognizable, not because they avoided suffering, but because they used suffering as a furnace to burn the weaker version of themselves. Despair is not the end, it is the stripping, and what comes after the stripping is the first real moment where you are no longer living as a continuation of your past self, but as a creator of your future one. It is the first moment where you can no longer pretend, perform, or delay, because survival forces honesty, and honesty forces evolution. When despair strikes, most people believe they have no choices left. They think life has pushed them into a corner, stripped them of options, and left them with nothing but damage to survive. But that belief is the first lie despair tells. You always have a choice. Not the choice to escape the situation, not the choice to erase the pain, not the choice to control the world outside you, but the choice that defines everything that happens next. The choice of who you will be while everything is falling apart. This decision is silent. No one sees it when it happens. No one claps for it. No one congratulates it. It doesn't happen in front of cameras or friends or comfort. It happens in your mind, in the moments when you are alone, staring at the weight you never asked to carry, wondering if you still have the energy to stand. That is the battlefield. Not the event that broke you, but the inner courtroom where you decide whether you will break with it or rise with it. Every person who ever rebuilt their life started with a moment the world didn't witness. The decision to not let the moment define them, but to let it refine them. The dangerous thing about despair is that it tricks you into believing the external collapse is what matters most. But the real collapse is internal. It is when you start negotiating with your own destruction. It sounds like this: maybe I'm just not meant for more. Maybe this is just who I am now. Maybe trying again is pointless. That is the moment you begin to shrink. Not physically, not socially, but spiritually. The world doesn't have to defeat you. It only has to make you stop believing there is anything left inside worth fighting for. That is why the Stoics said the greatest victory is not over the world, but over the self. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He didn't write that because he felt strong. He wrote it because he needed to remind himself that the only unbeatable person is the one who refuses to surrender the part of themselves that still chooses. You cannot always choose your circumstances, but you can choose your posture toward them. And that choice will decide your character, your fate, and your legacy. There are only two directions when despair arrives. You either become smaller or greater, but you never stay the same. You either use the pain as an excuse to stop or as a catalyst to transform. You either let the collapse turn you into a victim of what happened or into the architect of who rises because of what happened. The world will not decide that for you. The pain will not decide that for you. You have to decide it, and that decision is the pivot point of your entire life. This choice is made in darkness, long before the results ever appear. You won't feel ready when you make it. You won't feel powerful. You won't feel hopeful. The decision is not fueled by emotion. It is fueled by a refusal to allow despair to become identity. Because when you allow pain to name you, it becomes permanent. But when you allow pain to forge you, it becomes fuel. This is why two people can suffer the same wound and become completely different beings. One breaks, one awakens. The pain was the same, but the choice was not. Despair is not the moment life ruins you. It is the moment life hands you the chance to rebuild yourself without illusion. And the question you must answer is not, can I survive this? But who will I be after this? That question turns pain into power, emptiness into clarity, and collapse into rebirth. But only for the one who refuses to be defined by the wound and instead decides to rise as the one who walks out of it. When despair enters, it does not ask permission. It takes. It takes certainty, structure, momentum, direction, self-image, and every illusion of control you believed was yours. But what it cannot take, unless you surrender it, is your response. And in that response, there are only two paths. Most people think the options are give up or keep fighting, but that is too simplistic. The real division is far more subtle and far more dangerous. The first path is collapse. But collapse doesn't always look like defeat. Sometimes it looks like adapting downward, becoming smaller, lowering the expectations you once held for yourself, settling for a safer version of existence just to avoid more pain. The second path is transformation. The decision to let the pain shape a stronger identity instead of a weaker one. Collapse is deceptive because it often looks rational. People say things like, I just need to be realistic. Maybe it's better to stop wanting too much. It's easier if I expect nothing. And they call this peace. But it is not peace. It is resignation wearing the mask of maturity. It is not healing, it is shrinking. Collapse happens when a person stops dreaming, not because they have accepted life, but because they have accepted defeat, disguised as wisdom. They convince themselves that wanting less will hurt less, but the truth is the exact opposite. Wanting less does not reduce the pain, it only reduces the person. The wound remains, but the self becomes smaller than the wound. Transformation, on the other hand, does not deny pain. It uses it. It does not numb the discomfort, it studies it. It does not ask for the world to get easier, it asks for the self to get stronger. This path is not motivational, it is brutal. It requires confronting the truth that everything you were is not enough to carry you where you are going, which means you must evolve into someone you have never been. Transformation demands that you bury the weaker identity, the dependent identity, the identity that required comfort in order to function, and rebuild from the ashes of what has been taken. That is why so few choose it. Not because they do not want power, but because they do not want the death that precedes rebirth. The Stoics did not rise because they avoided collapse. They rose because they refused to let collapse define the final state. Marcus Aurelius lost children, faced betrayal, ruled during plague, fought war on multiple fronts, and wrote about virtue while watching his world decay. Yet he did not become bitter. He did not become smaller. He did not use suffering as proof that life was unfair. He used suffering as proof that the mind must become unbreakable if life will not stop breaking. That is transformation, not escaping the storm, but strengthening the structure that stands inside it. The true danger in suffering is not the pain itself. Pain is temporary, but identity shaped by pain can become permanent if you allow despair to tell you who you are now. You were not born to exist in survival mode. You were not born to spend the rest of your life protecting yourself from disappointment. You were meant to grow into someone the old you was not capable of imagining. But that version will never be born through comfort. It only emerges through the stripping, the burning, the pressure that removes what was weak, false, or borrowed, so that the real structure can take form. That is the decision every person must face in silence. Will you allow this moment to be the point where you stop expanding, stop believing, stop creating, stop attempting? Or will you use this moment to become the version of yourself that no longer depends on ideal circumstances to stay standing? Collapse is the easy path because it requires no courage. Transformation demands that you build a self that can endure what the previous self could not. And that version of you does not appear when life is good. It is born the moment life stops being good. Most people don't fail because life was too hard. They fail because they spent their lives avoiding the very experiences that would have made them stronger. They treat pain like a signal to retreat instead of a call to evolve. They run from discomfort, silence it with distraction, bury it under busyness, or disguise it as cynicism. But avoidance does not heal. It multiplies the wound. Every pain you refuse to face becomes a weight that follows you, shaping your decisions from the shadows. And the more you avoid it, the more power it gains over you. Pain only becomes strength when it is examined, not escaped. The Stoics understood this in a way most modern minds forgot. They did not preach positivity. They preached preparation. They didn't say, pretend everything is fine. They said, look directly at what terrifies you, because what you ignore owns you. A person who avoids suffering becomes a prisoner of fear. A person who studies suffering becomes the kind of human who can walk through storms others collapse under. Pain is not the enemy. Denial is. When you run from pain, you create fragility. You teach your mind that discomfort is unbearable. You train yourself to break at pressure. Every time you escape the weight instead of carrying it, you reinforce the story that you are too weak to handle what life brings. That belief becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. That is how people become smaller without realizing it. They do not collapse suddenly. They collapse one avoided struggle at a time. But the opposite is also true. When you face what hurts, even if you do not solve it immediately, something irreversible happens. You prove to yourself that you are still capable of standing inside the fire without disappearing. That proof becomes a reference point, and that reference point becomes the root of unshakable confidence. Not the confidence of someone who has never suffered, but of someone who has already survived what they once thought would destroy them. That is the foundation of real power, evidence, not theory. Marcus Aurelius did not write about strength from a throne of comfort. He wrote while grieving, commanding armies, losing people he loved, battling illness, and watching the empire shake. Yet he wrote not with despair, but with clarity, because he did not waste energy resisting pain. He used the pain to carve discipline, perspective, and wisdom into his character. The Stoics did not grow strong despite suffering. They grew strong because they forced themselves to confront it instead of negotiate with it. Here is the truth no one wants to accept. The things you avoid are the exact things that are shaping your weakness. The conversation you refuse to have, the wound you refuse to reopen, the identity you refuse to surrender, those are the real chains. Your freedom is on the other side of the discomfort you keep postponing. The longer you delay facing it, the more it silently dictates your life. You are not running from pain. You are running from the version of yourself that exists after you go through it. Pain is not a wall, it is a doorway, but only the person who stops escaping long enough to walk through it ever discovers what they are truly made of. Everyone wants to be unbreakable. Few are willing to endure what forges the unbreakable. Because the price is high. You must let parts of yourself die. The ego that needs validation, the identity that needs control, the pride that refuses to admit fear. When those pieces fall away, the pain feels like destruction. But what is really dying is the version of you that was never meant to go further. That is why pain is sacred. It separates the borrowed self from the real one. It removes the noise. It exposes the truth. And if you don't run, if you don't numb it, if you don't hide from it, pain becomes the moment you stop being who you were trained to be and start becoming who you were meant to be. The world celebrates outcomes, but it never sees the silent construction that took place long before the result appeared. People admire the discipline, the courage, the clarity, the resilience, but they forget that none of those traits were built in moments of comfort. They were born in private battles, fought in silence, forged in seasons where nothing made sense and no one was watching. The identity you live with in public is always built in the moments no one witnesses. That is why despair is not just a test. It is a factory. It is the place where weak identities die and stronger ones are born, but only for the person who refuses to let the darkness define them. You cannot build strength in the light. The light only reveals it. The building happens in the places where you are forced to rely on internal resources, because every external support has been removed. When you are alone with your thoughts long enough to confront the ones that frighten you. When the future looks empty enough to force you to create meaning instead of inherit it. When life removes all the voices you leaned on and leaves you with only one voice left, your own. That is the moment where identity becomes real, not rehearsed. Most people want confidence without uncertainty, courage without fear, wisdom without pain, growth without loss. But the universe does not work through additions. It works through removals. It takes away what you depended on until you have no choice but to activate a deeper structure inside yourself. You don't become strong when life is stable. You become strong when nothing is stable and you stand up anyway. You don't learn who you are when everything goes right. You learn when everything collapses and the only person left capable of rebuilding is you. The Stoics did not preach emotional numbness. They preached inner architecture. They taught that a person must build a mind that can withstand what the world cannot predict. Because life will always take turns you didn't plan for, remove people you thought would stay, break systems you relied on, and confront you with versions of yourself you didn't know existed. If your identity is built on anything that can be taken away, then despair will always win. That is why they taught, build the kind of strength that does not depend on outcomes, applause, agreement, or certainty. Build the kind of strength that can walk through fire because it was born in fire. The identity you create during suffering is not temporary. It becomes the lens through which you live the rest of your life. Once you learn that you can endure what once terrified you, your relationship with fear changes forever. Once you survive the version of life you thought you could not survive, freedom is no longer an idea. It becomes a fact. And once you stop being controlled by the need for everything to go right, you become someone the world cannot intimidate. This is why the strongest people are rarely the loudest. They are not performing strength. They have lived through enough darkness that they no longer need to prove anything to anyone. The world will meet the upgraded version of you later, the calm voice, the unshakable posture, the focus, the discipline, the conviction, but it will never understand where it came from, because the world never sees the chapter where you were shattered. The world only sees the version that was rebuilt from the pieces. And that is why despair is not a punishment. It is the invitation to become the version of yourself you cannot become while everything is still comfortable. You decide whether this darkness becomes a grave or a birthplace. If you surrender to it, it becomes the place you stay. If you rise through it, it becomes the place everything changed. The identity you are building now, in silence, in confusion, in pain, in exhaustion, will become the strength you carry into every future battle. And when the world asks how you became unbreakable, you will smile because you will know the truth. You were not made in the light. You were made in the dark. There comes a point in every collapse where the pain stops being just pain and becomes a question that does not ask what happened to you, but what you are going to do now that it has happened. This is the turning point, not when the suffering ends, not when life improves, not when answers arrive, but when you realize that the version of you who walked into this season is not the version who will walk out. That realization is the beginning of rebirth. Rebirth is not a moment of light. It is a moment of decision made in the dark when the only thing left to build with is your will. Rebirth is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It is not marked by sudden clarity or emotional victory. It happens quietly when a person finally understands that there is no going back. The past is no longer a place. The old self is no longer a home. And the life you once recognized no longer exists in a form you can return to. That is the death most people fear, not physical death, but the death of identity. Yet every great transformation requires that death to take place. You cannot be reborn while still protecting the version of yourself that was built for a world that no longer exists. The moment of rebirth is the moment you stop begging life to give back what it took and instead start asking what it is trying to make room for. That shift is everything. It is the moment you accept that the old worldview, the old expectations, the old emotional patterns, the old dreams, the old belief systems no longer match the person you are becoming. And instead of fighting to restore them, you start learning from what replaced them. Pain becomes information. Loss becomes direction. Emptiness becomes space, and silence becomes instruction. Rebirth is not about becoming a better version of who you were. It is about becoming someone that the past version of you was incapable of imagining. That is why suffering feels unfair. It is not refining the old self. It is ending it. The identity you had before the collapse cannot solve what the collapse revealed. That identity was built for ease, familiarity, predictability, and structure. The identity being built now is made for uncertainty, pressure, change, and truth. The old self was designed to maintain life. The new self is designed to transcend it. This is where most people retreat. because they mistake discomfort for danger and unfamiliarity for failure. They believe that if they don't recognize their life anymore, it means something has gone wrong. But in rebirth, the lack of recognition is proof that something is going right. Growth feels like loss because you are shedding what cannot survive in the next season. The mind resists it, calling it destruction. But the soul recognizes it as liberation. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus was born a slave and became a philosopher. Marcus Aurelius was born an emperor and became a servant of wisdom. Neither of them lived the life they were supposed to live. They lived the life they were forged into. And that is the essence of rebirth, becoming what life demanded from you, not what the world expected you to be. The reborn do not chase titles, roles, or identities that match the past. They build themselves for what the future will require. There is a moment in suffering when you stop trying to survive and begin to shape. That is the moment of rebirth. When you stop saying, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin saying, "What can I become because of it?" When you stop waiting for life to return what was lost and begin constructing a self that no longer depends on anything external to stand, that is when despair loses its power, not because it disappears, but because it can no longer decide who you are. Rebirth is not the moment you feel better, it is the moment you become undeniable, and no one will witness it but you. The world will only see the results later, and they will call it strength, they will call it wisdom, they will call it resilience, but you will know the truth. Those things were not given. They were built in silence by a version of you that refused to stay buried inside the pain. The reason most people break under despair is not because the pain is too great, but because they were taught to build their lives on certainty instead of strength. They believe that safety comes from predictability, that peace comes from control, that identity comes from stability, and that happiness comes from getting what they expect. So when life removes the structure they depended on, they feel as if they have lost everything, when in reality they have only lost the illusion that anything was guaranteed. The Stoics did not seek certainty. They knew it was impossible. They sought strength, the internal kind that needs nothing from the outside world in order to exist. They trained the mind to stop demanding comfort and instead adapt to reality. They taught that the most dangerous belief a person can have is not that life is unfair, but that life should be fair. Because the moment you believe life owes you anything, you create the conditions for permanent disappointment. The more you expect the world to protect you, the more shattered you become when it doesn't. Strength begins the moment you stop expecting and start preparing. Most people are raised to believe things will get better because time will fix them. But time doesn't fix anything. Time only reveals whether you are healing or decaying. It only shows whether you are becoming someone stronger or someone smaller. The Stoic mindset removes the passivity from suffering. Instead of waiting to feel better, you work to become better. Instead of asking life for mercy, you ask yourself for discipline. Instead of hoping the world stops hurting you, you train yourself to become someone who cannot be defeated by what hurts. This is the shift that turns despair into power, when you stop trying to control what happens next and instead control who you will be when it happens. When you stop asking for guarantees and start building capacity. When you stop praying for an easier path and start refining yourself into someone who can walk any path. That is the difference between a person who falls apart and a person who is forged. One needs the world to soften. The other becomes sharp enough to cut through whatever the world throws. Everything changes the moment you stop asking, "How do I make this stop?" and start asking, "How do I grow through this?" One question makes you a victim of life. The other makes you a participant in your own evolution. Pain stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you use. And once that shift happens, there is nothing the world can take from you that you cannot rebuild, because the foundation of your strength is no longer circumstantial. It is internal, earned, and unborrowed. Marcus Aurelius never wrote, "Make the world easier." He wrote, "If it is endurable, endure it. If it is not, stop complaining and end it." That was not apathy. It was mastery. It was the refusal to allow emotions to overrule the mind. It was the understanding that suffering is not what destroys you. Resistance to suffering is what destroys you. When you align your expectations with reality instead of desire, you stop breaking every time life bends. The Stoic shift is the turning point in every rebirth. Once you stop needing control, you become free. Once you stop seeking certainty, you become adaptable. Once you stop demanding guarantees, you become unstoppable, because the person who needs nothing cannot be broken by losing anything. That is the kind of strength despair tries to reveal. Not the strength to live without pain, but the strength to live above it. There is a moment in every internal battle where nothing changes on the outside, but everything changes on the inside. No one will notice it. No one will congratulate it. No one will even know it happened. But that invisible moment, the moment where you decide who you will be despite what you feel, is the moment that rewrites the rest of your life. The world will never see the exact second where you choose not to break. It will only see the results months or years later and call it strength, luck, discipline, or destiny. But you will know it was a decision made in silence, made in exhaustion, made when no one was watching, made when you had every reason to quit and one reason not to. This is the final test despair brings. Not whether you can escape the pain, not whether you can pretend it doesn't hurt, not whether life becomes fair again. The test is whether you will allow the chaos around you to define you, or whether you will build a self that remains intact even when nothing around you is. The pain is temporary. The identity created in response to that pain is permanent. That is what makes this decision heavier than the circumstances that triggered it. The event ends. The identity it produces does not. Every person who ever became unbreakable passed through the same silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence where you wrestle with the question, will I let this defeat me, or will I make this the reason I become more than I was? That is the question that determines whether despair becomes a grave or a birthplace. The people you admire didn't avoid that question. They answered it. They turned the moment of collapse into the moment of reconstruction. They used the wound as the blueprint. They let the hardship expose the parts of them that still relied on comfort, permission, and certainty, and then they burned those parts away. The world thinks strength is loud. It isn't. Weakness is loud. Fear is loud. Panic is loud. Strength is quiet because it is not trying to convince anyone. It is built for endurance, not applause. The person who rises does not need validation because they have already validated themselves by surviving what tried to erase them. That is why the strongest people speak calmly, move deliberately, react slowly, and decide carefully. They have already lived in the fire, so nothing outside can intimidate them anymore. The final irony of despair is this. Everything you think you are losing is simply clearing space for who you were supposed to become. The version of you that was built for approval, guarantees, or convenience cannot survive the seasons that are coming. So life removes what you were attached to, not to punish you, but to force you into becoming someone whose strength is not borrowed. Someone who wakes up not because life feels easy, but because they are no longer dependent on ease to stay alive inside. That kind of identity cannot be taught in calm seasons. It is only born in pressure. And when it is born, the world changes. Not because the world became safer, but because you stopped needing safety to function. You became the kind of person who can walk through storms without asking for shelter, who can lose everything except their will, who can stand alone without feeling abandoned, who can suffer without losing direction, who can rebuild without needing permission. That is what despair was trying to create from the beginning, not a weaker you, but a truer you. The world will see the results. Only you will know where they came from, and that is the reward, not recognition, but self-respect. The private victory that echoes in every future version of your life. The proof that when everything told you to collapse, you chose instead to become someone who never needed the world to cooperate in order to rise. There is one moment in suffering that matters more than every tear, every fear, every loss, and every unanswered question. It is the moment you decide to stop waiting to feel ready and begin acting as the person you are becoming. This is not motivation. This is identity. A single internal shift divides the life you had from the life you are now building. And once that shift happens, it cannot be reversed. You will never again fit into the smaller version of yourself because you have seen what you are capable of when everything collapses and you stand anyway. People believe change happens gradually, but true transformation happens in a single instant of awareness. The instant you stop asking, "When will this end?" and instead declare, "Even if it doesn't end, I'm not losing myself here." That is the moment the fire stops burning you and starts forging you. That is the moment the pain stops being a weight and becomes a weapon. That is the moment you stop being shaped by circumstance and start shaping who you will be regardless of circumstance. You don't become unbreakable when life calms down. You become unbreakable the moment you refuse to surrender your character while life is still in chaos. This choice is permanent because it rewires the way you interpret reality. You stop looking at difficulty as interruption and start seeing it as instruction. You stop seeing pain as a failure of life and start seeing it as a demand for evolution. You stop seeking paths without resistance and start seeking the version of yourself who can walk through any path without losing direction. You stop needing certainty because you finally understand that certainty was never the foundation of strength. Resilience was. The Stoics were not invincible. They felt pain, disappointment, injustice, fear, pressure, and grief, just like anyone else. But they refused to convert those emotions into identity. They refused to say, "I am broken," and instead said, "I am being shaped." They refused to say, "Why me?" and instead asked, "What now?" That is the difference between someone who collapses under life and someone who rises above it. One waits for life to change. The other changes themselves until life no longer has the power to reduce them. Once you make the choice not to let despair define you, something irreversible happens. You begin to respect yourself in a way no compliment, achievement, or applause could ever equal. The respect born from surviving your lowest point is the foundation of real confidence. Not the confidence that hopes things will work out, but the confidence that knows, even if they don't, you will. Once you have lived through pain without losing yourself, the world loses the ability to control you. And that is the quiet beginning of freedom. So the real question is not what will happen next. Life will always continue reshaping itself. The real question is whether you will step into the identity that was waiting beneath the version of you that finally broke. Whether you will let this moment define your limits or your origin. Whether this chapter becomes the story of how you fell apart or the story of how you finally woke up to who you were capable of being. The choice is already in front of you. No one can make it for you. No one can take it from you. And once you make it, nothing, not the past, not the pain, not the world, will ever be able to unmake it. There will come a day when you look back at this season of your life, not with resentment, but with recognition. You will realize that the moment that felt like the end was actually the beginning. The pain that seemed designed to destroy you was the pressure required to reveal you. The silence that felt like abandonment was the space necessary for rebirth. And the version of you that walks forward from this moment will not be the same person who entered it. That person is gone. What remains is someone forged, not formed. Someone tempered, not taught. Someone built from truth, not comfort. Life has a way of stripping everything that is borrowed until only what is real remains. The title you held, the identity you performed, the certainty you clung to, the emotional dependencies you mistook for strength, they cannot survive the fire. And that is not a tragedy. That is purification. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the parts of yourself that were too fragile to carry into the future you are meant for. What survives the fire is the part of you that was already eternal. The will, the character, the internal authority no one gave you and no one can take. The person you are becoming will not rely on external validation to feel valuable. They will not negotiate their worth based on whether the world approves. They will not wait for guarantees before acting. They will not collapse when life turns unpredictable. They will move differently, speak differently, choose differently, because they will no longer need the world to cooperate in order to feel whole. That is what despair was shaping, not a smaller you, but a sovereign you. People will assume you healed because time passed. They won't understand that you healed because you decided to rise while you were still bleeding. They will assume you are calm because life became easy. They won't know that you became calm because chaos stopped having authority over your mind. They will admire your discipline, your clarity, your strength, without realizing all of it was built in nights where you could have broken, but didn't. The world will only ever see the result. You will always remember the making. There is a quiet power in a person who no longer fears loss because they have already survived the worst things they imagined. There is an unshakable confidence in someone who no longer needs external stability because they have built internal stability. And there is a peace in someone who no longer asks, "Why did this happen to me?" but instead declares, "Because of this, I am no longer who I was." This is the final gift hidden inside despair, the creation of a self so rooted, so disciplined, so awake that nothing externally can define them anymore. Not praise, not rejection, not success, not failure, not uncertainty, not loss. You will walk into the next chapters of your life not as someone who needs the world to be predictable, but as someone who knows they can adapt to anything the world becomes. One day the people around you will ask how you developed this resilience, this clarity, this ability to stay grounded in storms that destroy others. And you will know the answer, not because you read it, but because you lived it. You became this person in the moments no one saw, in the battles no one applauded, in the silence no one understood. You became this person because despair forced you to choose, and you chose to rise. And that choice, made in darkness, will become the light you carry into every room, every challenge, every future version of your life. Every person reaches a moment where life stops asking and starts demanding. A moment where all the noise disappears and you're left with nothing but the truth of who you are when nothing goes as expected. That moment is not a curse. It is the doorway. Because the world does not get to decide what this season turns you into. Only you do. The pain may not be optional, but the identity you build from it always is. And if there is one lesson the Stoics carved into history, it is this: the greatest victories are not won in the world, but within the mind that refuses to surrender to it. Everything you have just heard leads to one reality. Despair is not the end of your story unless you decide it is. It is not the moment you die inside. It is the moment you are invited to choose who you will be when the world can no longer decide that for you. You have already survived the worst part. the shock, the loss, the uncertainty, the collapse. Now comes the only part that matters, what you build from here, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now. The identity you create in this exact moment is the one that will walk into every future moment of your life. If this message reached you, it is not by accident. It is because life is asking whether you are ready to stop being shaped by what happened and start being shaped by what you decide happens next. And if the answer is yes, then you are no longer the same person who pressed play on this video. You are already in the process of becoming someone the older version of you was not strong enough to be. That is the rebirth. Quiet, internal, irreversible. If you want to continue building that version of yourself, you are in the right place. This channel is not about motivation. It is not about comfort. It is about mastery. It is for the ones who are done being broken, done being defined by life, and ready to take command of the only battlefield that ever truly mattered, the self. If this message spoke to you, don't just leave. Decide, stay, subscribe. Because the next video isn't just content, it's another weapon. And together, we are building a mind the world cannot defeat.